right. Today's discussion is about entrepreneurship as art. So entrepreneurship as science as well, but I think we have plenty of material out there on entrepreneurship as a science. So, I'm going to speak today as on entrepreneurship as an art form, given the fact that art is a very experiential activity. I'm also an artist, and to appreciate art, you want to have to do art, right? You have to create art. Then you get a sense of what art is, and in that sense, entrepreneurship is very similar. And I'm going to try and discuss some of that today. So before we start, a quick note that grab a notebook or to make notes, because through the session we will have a couple of introspection sessions, 1 minute introspection sessions. Maybe Urmika, if you can time it, if you have a phone handy or something, we will do these 1 minute reflection sessions, and you can just sort of ping and say, okay, time is up. All right, so let's get started. Let me start with a story. So this is a story from Jataka tales, a set of Buddhist tales from ancient India. And I remember reading it as a child, and I thought it's a great story. So, this is how the story goes. There are two students who are studying in a Gurukul, two senior students who are friends. And one day the Guru comes to them and says, hey guys, I think, you have studied enough. It is time for you to go out into the world and find your fortune. So these two students decide to leave the school, leave the Gurukul, and go out to the nearest city. So they come to the gates of the city, and one of them says, my ambition is to become the wealthiest merchant in this city. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look for a school, merchant school, where they teach how to be a merchant. And then I'm going to go find the biggest merchant. I'm going to work for him. I'm going to learn how it all works. And I'm going to become the wealthiest merchant in the city. And he asked the other guy, what are you going to do? So this guy says, I don't know, man. I'm just going to go around the streets of the city. We'll see what happens. So this guy is going around the streets of the city, and he comes across a dead mouse lying on the side of the street. So he picks it up and he's looking at it. And, he just keeps it with him, and he goes a little further and he sees a merchant with a cat, and the cat is really meowing. And he asks the merchant, what is the thing? He says, no, this cat is really hungry. I forgot to feed him when we were back at home. He says, hey, I have this little mouse. If you want it, you can have it. This guy says, hey, thank you. This is perfect. And he says, hey, I don't have much to give you. I have these couple of copper coins. So this guy says, thank you. He takes those copper coins, goes, buys an old pot, fills it with water, goes, buys some jaggery, goes out of the city, sits near a farm where people are, harvesting flowers. And then he waits. And in the middle of the day, all these tired farmers come sit under the tree. He says, do you want to have some jaggery? Do you want some cool water to drink? And they are so happy that they give him some flowers. And then this guy does it every day. And every day they give him some flowers. He takes those flowers. He makes beautiful bouquets. He sells it in the market. After he does this for a while, and he's some amount of money he's able to collect. And then one day he realizes that there is another farming activity happening outside the town, which is grass harvesting. People harvesting grass back in those days. And he realizes that this is a bigger harvesting operation. He decides to set up there as well. So he does the same thing. He gives jaggery, and people ask him, what can we do? Thank you so much. He says, one day I'll come back and ask you. Then one day he hears that there is a large army that is passing by the city. And he puts two and two together, realizes that large army has a lot of horses. Horses need grass. So he goes to these grass cutters and says, will you sell me all the grass that you've produced for the next 3 days? I will pay you afterwards. They say, hey, you have been giving us jaggery and water for so long. We won't say no to a friend. So they give him the grass. And then, when the entire, all the horses in the army arrives, he's the only one in that entire city who has any grass for the horses. No one else has, because he's bought out all the supply. He sells it to them, makes a little fortune, pays off all these people, uses that fortune to set up another venture and another venture. And slowly he builds up, and he becomes one of the wealthiest merchants in the town. One day his assistant comes and tells him, someone wants to come and meet you. He wants to be your apprentice. He wants to learn from you. Should I let him in? He says, yeah, go ahead, let him in. The guy comes in and sees it's his old friend, who is still figuring out how to learn business and how to work under someone and things like that. So this is the story of the mouse merchant. And, I read it as a kid, and it remained with me all these years. It is a great story about entrepreneurship. And I think it encapsulates what we want to discuss about entrepreneurship today. About this guy, about how he thinks on his feet, about how his opportunities, he started with a mouse. Whereas the other guy had grand ambitions and grand plans about going and, you know, building wealth and all that. This guy started with a mouse, and how he's able to take these little things and build his journey, right? So we're going to explore this phenomenon today. So let me start. My name is Supreeth. I'm an entrepreneur, designer for about 25 years. I teach as well, and I'm a practicing artist. So prior to, today I run a company called Idea Sutra, which designs for social impact. That is to say, we work with NGOs and foundations and social entrepreneurs and people like that. So prior to this, I used to be a creative director at a couple of firms. I've also been the head of information architecture at a hospital. And I've been on the board of studies at Chitrakala Parishad, which is the local art school here in Bangalore. Now, along with my work at Idea Sutra, I'm also the director for the Idea Sutra Sandbox. And this is a concept I want to discuss today. So the Idea Sutra Sandbox is actually an internal innovation lab at Idea Sutra. It is completely internally funded. And the kind of projects we do here is that we look for interesting, tiny social problems, and we try to evolve solutions for those problems. And in a bit, I will tell you how it helps my business and how it helps society at large, or I hope it helps society at large. So when we discuss entrepreneurship, we need a counterpoint, right? So that we are able to sort of ping it off another subject and see how it works. So one of the things I keep hearing is that people keep saying that to be a good entrepreneur, you need to know business, and the best way to learn business is to do an MBA, right? Now, while it is true that an MBA, administration, business administration teaches you some fundamentals. It teaches you sales, it teaches you finance, it teaches you how to maintain a cash flow, it teaches you, a bunch of things. It is not the same as entrepreneurship. It has all those material in it. And, all the business students who are listening to this, I'm sure you have recognized what I'm saying so far, right? Under administration, you learn a lot of processes, you learn a lot of ratios, you learn a lot of formulas, but you will see that all of this is inadequate when it comes to entrepreneurship because of the nature of entrepreneurship. Now, for those of you who are interested about when did entrepreneurship move away from business administration, you go to the late 1800s, the rise of the Industrial Revolution, the rise of factories, and a new class, the managerial class that was required to manage these factories. And that is where the modern day MBA education comes from. However, it is today, if you look for, entrepreneurship platforms where you can learn about entrepreneurship, it's very, very few, right? And there is good reason. It's very hard to teach entrepreneurship. In a sense, let me use a metaphor. Let us say you're looking for food, right? You go out looking for fruit. You go into a jungle, you have to forage. You're not sure where the fruit tree is. You go around looking around, you find some berries, you find some nuts, you get a mixed bag of food, right? The same thing, you go into an orchard, the method you use is very different. Instead of foraging, you're harvesting. Here, you're not so concerned about finding food. Here, it is about how to efficiently gather food. Does that make sense? So in a sense, the difference between entrepreneurship and administration is something like this. Administrative studies teach you harvesting. After you finish your MBA, you join an organization that is already stable. It is already set. It is like an orchard. You simply have to use your existing processes to ensure things keep running. However, as an entrepreneur, it is a jungle. You're never clear where there is an opportunity. How big an opportunity is it? Is it worth thing? Is it poisonous? You have no idea. You can only learn through trial and error and experience. So, having set these expectations, describing entrepreneurship is kind of like describing what playing hide and seek feels like. And imagine, you have to describe what this game is like to someone who has never played it, right? So you can explain the rules of the game. You can say something like, hide and seek means someone counts and you go hide and then they will come and look for you. It seems very simple when you look at it and you think, yeah, sure. But how do you describe what a good hiding place is? How do you describe what it means to blend into your surroundings? How do you describe what it means to be quiet? All of these things require you to actually play it, right? For you to understand. And entrepreneurship is like this. It cannot be described. You need to sort of do entrepreneurship to learn entrepreneurship. And one really nice quote that captures this is by Howard Stevenson. He's a professor from HBS. He said entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. Now, for business students especially, I want you to take a look at this quote, because what it means is that a manager would, what is a manager typically taught? Think about it. When you're given a project to accomplish, the first thing you do is identify resources. You identify your resource needs. Then you go and put together these resources, and then you go and attempt the project, which is very different from the way an entrepreneur does it. An entrepreneur really doesn't care what resources are currently controlled. He doesn't care whether he's got 10 rupees or 100 rupees. He will go out and make a bet with 10 rupees, and he will do what he can with 10 rupees to learn what he can from the market. This is not to say that he's a risk taker. In fact, there is this mindset that entrepreneurs means, you're a huge risk taker and all that. Yes, you do take risks, but these risks are very planned and controlled risks, as I will show you later. Another way of describing the space in which an entrepreneur works versus a space in which a manager works. Now, I'm not saying anything against managers. I'm just, like I said, I'm looking for a juxtaposition, right? You need to counterpoint something so that you can recognize what is going on. So, I didn't want to put a modern day information entrepreneur, because, he's just someone in a suit. You can't make out the difference. So I put an entrepreneur from the informal economy. So you can see the space that an entrepreneur works in is chaos. This particular entrepreneur is carrying his entire office set up with him and has worked out a system where he can both transport himself and use it as a central tool to ply his trade, right? And this kind of captures the sensibility of an entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is kind of like this, thriving in chaos, right? Or rather trying to find a way in chaos. Look at a space in which a manager operates. It is extremely ordered system, right? In fact, a manager would simply break down in chaos, or if there was too much chaos. Imagine a manager trying to operate in this space, or imagine this person operating this space. They're very vastly different environments. Which brings us to what Professor Saraswati says about entrepreneurs are like explorers setting out on voyages into uncharted waters. Now, please make a note and do a Google search on Professor Saraswati. She is the author of this idea called effectuation, 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 which is a very different way of thinking. So she also, does this juxtaposition with managers. And she says managers are causal thinkers. That is, they think in terms of, cause and effect. So this should lead to this, this should lead to this. Entrepreneurs are non-linear thinkers because, it is like walking into uncharted waters. So they cannot be linear in the way they think. So if entrepreneurship is in that sense tacit knowledge, what I mean by what tacit knowledge means is something that is not explicit. How to fly a kite is explicit knowledge. You can say, build a kite like this, put it out in the air, wait for the wind to come, give it a push, and it will fly. However, the idea of pressure and, how do you sort of reel it in and let it fly and all of that is tacit. You can't explain it. You need to hold the string to get a sense. Now, if entrepreneurship is tacit knowledge, then how does someone like me study it? So I'm a design researcher, and one of the subjects remember we spoke about the sandbox, right? The internal innovation lab. One of the subjects we study there is entrepreneurship. So then if it is tacit, if it can only be sort of learned through practice, then how does one study it? It is a very complex thing. In fact, this is the famous design squiggle. You can Google the design squiggle, and it gives you a sense of how designers do problem solving. So it is in a very similar way. You start out in total confusion, chaos. There are too much noise, too many patterns, but you work your way through it. You try and identify patterns, and eventually a signal sort of comes out of the noise, and you're able to sort of pin your work via that signal. So this is what it kind of looks like. We are simultaneously using a top-down and a bottom-up approach, right? So a top-down approach is where you have people like Professor Saraswati who have been doing entrepreneurial research for a very long period of time. So there are established theories, there are schools of thought. We do a lot of literature review. So this is a top-down, right? Bottom-up is where we directly work with entrepreneurs. So the Trellis network is a peer support network. It allows entrepreneurs to work with each other to solve each other's problems. And I'm an administrator on this chapter in this network. And I'm able to sort of work with the entrepreneurs, listen to them, learn from them, take the, observe the way they solve problems. So this bottom-up approach and this top-down approach kind of match, right? I'm able to take these learnings and fit them into a lattice work of ideas, right? So this is the way we are currently doing this research. And what comes out of this is a kind of, our learnings are a knowledge base. It is a kind of, you can call it an ontology of entrepreneurship. It helps us to identify who are the different entities, what are the roles they play, that sort of a thing, and try and make some sense of what is happening here. So, are there better ways to teaching entrepreneurship, right? So some of the ways that are currently used are, for instance, the mentorship system. And I've been observing the mentorship system for a very long time. And I think the problem with the system like that is that it is not foolproof. Nothing is foolproof. So mentorship, for instance, people start using it to attain status. And if that kind of thing starts happening, then it is a problem. So I started thinking about the ways in which entrepreneurship used to be taught, say, 400-500 years ago in India, right? So there are two ways of doing it. One is the apprenticeship model, which you can still see. For instance, you go to the mechanic, you'll say, Chotu, spanner leke aare. What is Chotu learning? Chotu is learning more than how to give a spanner. He's also learning more than how to fix the bike. He's watching and learning how you do negotiations, how you collect money, so he's learning the tricks of the trade. So through an apprenticeship system, and when he's old enough, Chotu is going to go and set up his own shop, and he's going to become a specialist in Bullet or Java or something, and and then inspire another line of entrepreneurs. So this apprenticeship system is one. The other system used to be the Shreni system, which is a association of practitioners. So in the old days, you would have Shrenis or associations, which would sort of, if you're a new entrepreneur, you come into the Shreni and you learn by watching others, right? So this became this became a kind of a seed of an idea, right? Now, this is the kind of work the Sandbox does. It works with local arts and culture. We started a community for artists that has been around for a decade now. And it's called Pencil Jam. Some of you may have heard of it. It is in different cities, Bangalore, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai. And they meet once a week to draw together as a group. So in this picture, you can see the first picture on the left. We are drawing in a village in Kerala where they teach drumming. Similarly, we work in the space of organization, culture, early childhood education, bunch of things. Now look at all these pictures and tell me what is the one thing that is similar over here, right? All of them have a group of people. So essentially this forms, this is called communities of practice. You may want to Google this. This is a very well-known practice in the social science space. The idea of communities of practice is that people learn best when they learn from each other, right? Social learning, as opposed to the mentorship model where there is this one person who sort of gives out knowledge. Here, it is a network of knowledge. Now, the idea here is that I have come to believe that entrepreneurs are the best people to teach other entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs are the best people to support other entrepreneurs. And why I say this is, remember we discussed that entrepreneurship is very hard to teach. If you could teach it in a business school, we would be teaching entrepreneurship more than we would be teaching administration, right? Because it creates value, it improves the economy. But the reason why we don't is because it's very hard. And therefore, I believe that, even if you're a beginning entrepreneur, simply working with other entrepreneurs of your own type will give you more value than going and listening to, some experienced, successful entrepreneur who has gems of advice for you, right? So communities of practice is the way we are trying to both learn and teach entrepreneurship, which brings us to Trellis. Now, Trellis is a sandbox project. It is an part of our internal innovation lab. It is in its early stages, and a lot of what we are going to be discussing today comes partly from the work we have been doing at the network. All right. So entrepreneur, I came across a very interesting word the other day, metis, right? Apparently, it is an ancient Greek term, and it stands for this street smart, cunning, quick-witted, shrewd personality, right? And it is entrepreneurship is entirely personality based. Uh, when you hear things like a VC saying, we don't invest in the idea, we invest in a team. What they're essentially saying is a really good idea can be wrecked by a bad team. Like if you don't have the right mindset, if you don't have the right personality to be an entrepreneur, you can take a really good idea and make it, really screw it up. On the other hand, if you're a really smart, street smart, quick-witted character, you can take a really bad idea and you can really make it work. So really, entrepreneurship is about personality. So, in the picture, I don't know if you can see it clearly, the guy on the left, he's sitting on the side of a street and peeling vegetables. You can run a search for, best salesman in the world, and you will on YouTube, and you will find this guy. And he's, just doing this, he built himself a nice lifestyle, nice, not a very wealthy, to buy islands or something, but definitely rich, right? So this is entrepreneurship. It is a kind of street smart, quick-witted, on the road. You do things and you learn things by doing things. You don't learn things by reading books and coming up with plans, but you by doing things, right? So let's take a quick 1-minute break. Urmika will time it. Take a 1-minute break and write down your reflection on this idea of entrepreneurship so far. What I want you to do is look back into your own life and come up with instances where you solve problems on the fly, where you were able to quickly think on your feet. Yeah, Urmika, just let me know when 1 minute is up. I'm sure everyone has had that lucid moment where you have on the fly solved problems. Make a note of it, just write it down. The reason I'm asking you to do that is you will have patterns. By the end of this talk, you should have some patterns on how you have done it before. Therefore, you can do it again.
So time's up.
Thank you, Urmika. Okay, let's move on. So how can we have this talk? Given the fact that entrepreneurship is metis, it is tacit knowledge, it is hard to explain, and all of that. What is a good way to have this talk? So what I thought was our on-field observations working with entrepreneurs. I'm going to take that. I'm going to tell you some stories from that, and from these stories we will try and form some principles, and then if possible, we will take these principles and come up with some method. Right? I'm not saying it's bulletproof, it is experimental, but we will try it. All right. Okay. So I'm going to start with two stories here. One is about awnings. Now everyone knows what awnings are, right? You go to outside a shop, you have this thing that is sticking out, like a shelter made out of flex or material or whatever. That's an awning. So this was in the early 1990s that I came across this entrepreneur, and he had started the business about 10 years before that. So let's say 80s. This guy is an SSLC graduate. That's it. I think he did first PUC and dropped out. His father used to run a typewriter factory. They used to manufacture typewriters, and around the end of the 80s, early 90s, sales of typewriters were going down because PC sales were slowly just about beginning to sort of pick up. People were still buying it, but it was everyone knew that the market was slowly sort of going into a slide. This guy's father used to own that factory, and this guy, the way he used to describe himself to me is that I'm a loafer. He had this Java bike, motorbike, and what he used to tell me is all I really like is to ride around town and get drunk and ride around town, do this. One day his father said, look, you have to run this business, you have to do something, you can't just sit around at home. So he said, the way he told me was I took my Java and I started going around Bangalore looking for, just thinking out loud. And he saw these awnings, and these were still the early days. So the awnings would typically, by these very well-established, a very upscale restaurant would have these things. And some of these awnings you could sort of retract. They were called retractable awnings. So this guy noticed that some of these upscale places have these retractable awnings. He went and studied it, asked those people, where is it coming from? They're apparently being bought from Italy. So someone has a distributorship, is importing them and selling them. This guy goes back to the typewriter factory. They have a metal forge for them to make metal parts because it's a factory, right? And he sits in for the next 3 months, designs a retractable awning. And then he casts the parts himself and makes the first 20 pieces himself. Goes and sells it for 1/10 of the cost. And before you know it, all over South India, this guy's awnings are going up. Obviously, he's done jugaad, so the awnings also start breaking down after about 6 months. But this guy very smartly sets up a service team in place who are going and servicing and getting some small service fee for that also. Then this guy goes to these brands like Pepsi and Coke and all of these things that were around there, and he tells them that, do you know how much real estate I have across such and such cities? They're all over the place. If you want, I'm going to put your logo on it. Then he goes to these restaurants and says, you know what, how would you like to have an awning at half the price? I will subsidize the price for you. And then he goes and he gets all these fellows to put their logos, and this guy made a ton of money. And before you know it, he was sitting on a small fortune, which he started using to do other, diversify into other businesses. So this is my first story. The second story is about this guy who was a manager at a IT outfit. And he decided he always wanted to be an entrepreneur. He always wanted to have his own restaurant, and not just any restaurant. It had to be a performance space, a restaurant where you can call in the best musicians from across the world who will play their music while his guests could, eat the best kind of food made by the most amazing chefs. And I spent time with him in the early days. I listened to him speaking about his vision, and he had a very spectacular vision. It was with crystal clarity. He would go across Delhi, Mumbai, to various restaurants, eat their food. He did this for a year and a half, tasting food, just to get a sense of how all these places operate. And then he built this dream space. It ran for 2 years or 3 years, and then it had to shut down because it was very hard. It was simply too expensive to keep that place running, and that thing sort of died and shut shop. So what can we learn? Opportunity driven versus managers are goal driven. This guy had a goal that one day I want to build a restaurant, and this is how it is, and that is my goal, and this is how I'm going to approach it, right? Entrepreneurs don't think like that. They don't think in terms of goals, and they do have goals, but these goals are not monoliths that are unchanging in some distant future. Rather, they keep changing. So entrepreneurs really care more about the opportunity. If they are very good at spotting opportunities, they can spot the smallest opportunity. This guy was he claims to be someone who's a loafer, but he's so good at spotting opportunities. And I've seen him do it again and again and again. He started another business which uses honeycomb paper to set up temporary housing. Again, he did it the same way. By starting, he made the first wall himself, built the first house himself, and then he started selling it in mass. Second, entrepreneurs commit really quickly, right? This guy took a year and a half, gathering data from everywhere. After a while, the data is going to bury you. It's just going to kill you. You don't need that much data. You need to commit and you need to test. So what an entrepreneur does is, in the moment he sees an opportunity, he commits to it and makes something really small and sells it. And that will tell him whether it works or not. A manager, on the other hand, will write a 60-page business plan, right? All right. So what is the principle we can take away from this? What we can say is planning is not separate from execution, right? One doesn't plan first and then execute. You would if you were a manager. As in, an organization requires you to first submit your plan, which is then green lighted for approval, and then you execute, because this is how organizations work. But as an entrepreneur, you will find that doing is planning. That the way you learn is by making something really small, selling it, watch what happens, and then that is how you learn. And that is your planning, right? That gives you data to take your next step. So take a minute, think about this, write it down, think about the times in your life where you learned something by actually doing it. And also write down where you overplanned and over-engineered something and ruined it. Yeah, take a minute and write it down. Sometimes the fastest way to learn something is to actually do it. Sometimes the fastest way to plan something is actually to do it. In fact, I was having a chat with a gentleman last month, who had an idea for a project, and I was telling him, and he had already thought of 1 year down the line what he's going to be, how the project is going to be doing and all that. I was telling him, do the first step, like do the very first step, and don't spend too much money. Like do it for some 2,000 rupees or something. Do one small thing first. That will give you enough data, right? Okay, so let's move on to the next set of stories. This two stories again. The first one is about this lady who is working in the space of children's fashion. So essentially, she used to work as in the corporate space, and on the side, she is really good at this idea of taking little bets. So on the side, she started experimenting with children's fashion, essentially, creating customized fashion products for children. And one day she came across some child who took a look at one of the clothes and made a statement like, I also want to do this or something. And the first thing that this entrepreneur thinks is, why the hell not? So she came up with a system where children can design their own clothes. And now that system is potentially outselling the clothes themselves, right? So this is the first story. The second story is about a company in the IT space. So essentially, these guys they are software resellers. So they will resell Microsoft products and help you integrate them into your company. So if Microsoft has a CRM or a HRM, they will integrate it into your company. On the side, they decided to build a CRM themselves because they saw an opening in the market. There was a place for a small CRM. So they decided. So they first wrote a long business plan, which took about 6 months, and analysis and market analysis and all that, and then they started building it. The original deadline was about 6 months. Now it has been about 3 years later. I checked in with them just to think they were still building the product. So here's the thing: people forget that the market doesn't just sit around waiting for your product to get ready, right? So by the time they had finished what they thought was the bare minimum required, the market has changed, assumptions have changed, what people require has changed. Now they needed to add a few more features, they felt, and 3 years later they were still adding features. The project has not actually gone out into the market at that time when I checked it, right? So again, there is a very interesting juxtaposition between the way this lady is thinking versus the way this person is thinking. This lady is, she's constantly thinking in terms of what little bet she can take that will prove her right, or rather prove her wrong. Really, entrepreneurs are looking for things that will, mistakes are the best way to learn in entrepreneurship, right? So what do we learn from here? Entrepreneurs, they make many little bets, and this is very important. We were discussing risk earlier. What an entrepreneur does is she will think, what can I afford to lose? She's not thinking, versus this CRM team, for instance, they were thinking, what do we stand to gain if we bring in a CRM into the market? So they are thinking in terms of, what do we gain from this? Versus an entrepreneur thinks, what can I afford to lose? Right? And this is a very, very important mindset that will allow you to, not overextend yourself. You make little bets, not something that will bankrupt you, something that will just teach you something about the market. So, but a manager doesn't think in terms of little bets. They think in terms of one large single project. Like the management will greenlight the project, and then over a period of 6 months or a year, you finish the project. Right? So they look at it as a single stage project. Entrepreneurs, they tend to make their projects anti-fragile. Now, anti-fragility, for those who don't know it, let me explain. Nicholas Taleb, the guy who wrote it, Nassim Nicholas Taleb, you can just run a Google search for anti-fragility, you will get some good examples. But a quick one is, think of a porcelain teacup, right? A porcelain teacup does not take stress very well. That is, if you drop the cup, it will break. Now think of your muscles, right? Think of your muscles and apply stress to it every day, right? It doesn't break. In fact, it gets stronger. The more stress you apply to your muscles are anti-fragile. They benefit from stress and disorder. Versus a teacup is fragile because it does not benefit from disorder. So what an entrepreneur does is, by taking the small bet, the idea keeps getting, exposed to the market when it is really tiny. So over a period of time, what happens is that the idea becomes anti-fragile. It becomes used to the system shocks. It benefits from the shocks. Now think of the manager who has, spent 6 months working on a project and then takes it over to the market. The fragility is still built in. It has not been exposed to the market. So the entire project is fragile. It goes to the market completely fragile. If something breaks, the entire project sort of goes down, right? So this is another very important. Yeah, those of you who have heard of Miyamoto Musashi, who wrote a book called The Book of Five Rings. The Book of Five Rings. This is from medieval Japan. He also used to say, when you go into a fight, right? When sword fight, don't think I want to win. Think I do not want to lose. Right? This is a very important thing. This is the same thing that he's saying as well. So what is the principle we can derive from this? What it means is your product is a continuum. You've heard of the term, continuous beta or something they say, it is in constant beta. Your product is in constant beta. This is what it means. There is no one point where you be able to say, our product is ready for launch. That is nonsense. Your product is a continuum. It is always ready for launch. It was ready for launch when you put the first little bet. It is ready for launch 10 years later, right? So your product is a continuum. Don't get into the mindset that we are still making the product. One day we will launch it and all that. There is no difference between when you start with a little bet to when sometimes, what your product is, you won't even recognize it 10 years later. And if you look at a lot of these stories, of these famous software companies like Slack, for instance, they started as a game or something and eventually became a chat channel. So they, you yourself won't recognize your product. So, remember that your product is a continuum. Don't stop looking at it as a discrete unit. All right, coming to the third set of stories. I promise this will be the last set. This is, so this is an event manager, very smart guy, started his first business. He used to be a manager in a company. He started a business. That business failed after a few years. He had taken a large sums of money as loan from a bank, and it failed. And one tiny part of that business was an event management. It wasn't a very large part. It was a very tangential part of his business, event management. So, while the business failed, he looked at it almost like, imagine you walk into a room and there is a chessboard there with some pieces have fallen off, as in they're out of the board, but the board still has some pieces. And if you understand the game of chess, when you walk in there, you're not taking it personally. You're not thinking, oh, I have lost, or oh, I have won. You're just looking at these pieces and say, okay, what move can I make, right? So in that sense, this guy looked at his board and he said, okay, most of my business has failed, but what did I get from here? What did I learn? And he realized he had learned some amount of event management. He had, because of his business, he had learned how to network. He had built a network, stuff like this. So he said, I'm going to start really small. I'm going to go to colleges and ask them if we can conduct their cultural festivals. In 1,000 days, this guy built about a 2 CR business doing that. Today, he's got a 30-man team that goes to various cities. Not now because of the pandemic, but goes around the country conducting high-class, very professionally conducted events for colleges. And he built a great business out of completely nothing. And he did it in, I think, about 1,000 days. He did it, if I remember right. So this is one story. Now, the matching story is a senior guy who was at a senior level in a very large multinational. Decided that it's his life's dream to be an entrepreneur, and he hadn't had a chance to try it when he was younger. So he decided to sort of take a lot of his savings, borrowed some, and decided to address the problem of Kirana store aggregation. So his idea was that all this Big Basket and Amazon and all that is fine, but Kiranas need their own digital backbone, and I'm going to build that backbone, which is a great idea. Except that, when by the time he was done with it, every locality, Kiranas in every locality had their own rules and had their own way of doing things, and they needed him to provide some feature or some. His software became a mess of business rules, and it became so complex that eventually it simply couldn't take off. It was simply too heavy, and it just folded, right? So look at the simplicity of the first one. It's like a brick. It's as simple as a brick. That guy is saying, okay, I have event management experience, what can I do? Who runs events? Colleges run events. Okay, let me go to a college. Like the idea is like a brick, literally. Whereas the other idea is like like a spaceship or something. It has so many interconnecting moving parts, kirana stores, their transaction systems and all of that. It just gained so much weight, it never really took off. Ultimately, the guy shut down and he had to go back to the job market. So entrepreneurs don't take it personally. When something bad happens, when something they don't take it personally. They don't see it as a reflection of who they are, really. The term, no? When life gives you lemons, make lemonade. Entrepreneurs literally make lemonade. Yeah. Versus managers, I don't know why this is. Maybe it is because of the way organizations sort of give you bad points if you fail or whatever it is. Managers tend to look at it as a personal failure. If they fail, they don't look at it as a system failure. They look at it as, I have personally failed, like I am a loser, something is wrong with me, I'm not good at it. So they give it up, or maybe try it again after a hiatus, when they feel that they're ready to try. But essentially they see it as a setback. But entrepreneurs, how they learn? They learn via negativa. So what learning via negativa means? It means that you learn what something is not. So there are two ways to learn, right? You learn what works. You can also learn from what does not work. And entrepreneurs, what works, market will tell you, because there are plenty of examples of what works out there in the market. What does not work is very hard to come by, because no one will tell you. It isn't out there. You can't run a, or how can I be an utter loser? You won't get articles for that. So they learn via negativa. They don't take it personally. Managers tend to take it very personally. So the principle we can derive from this is, when you see a setback, you look at it as a system feedback. When something is not working, the system is trying to tell you something. When you finding something hard, the system is trying to tell you something. You need to be, listen to the system, listen to what is working. Don't overextend yourself. Don't blame yourself. Don't beat yourself up saying that you are a loser and all that. Rather, look at the overall system and recognize what is happening. It is giving you feedback. It's telling you what you should try, that you should try something else, or you should do it in a different way. Recognize it for what it is. Don't take it personally. So those are the 6 stories, and hopefully they have given you a sense of the entrepreneurial space and how things seem to work, right? Okay, so but this is literally us getting into the stories and sort of mucking around at the grassroots level. But if you were to pull back up, because abstract it a bit, what would it look like? So this is a very rudimentary map that we have created at Trellis. It's a very in its early stages, and I'm not sure if you can read all of it. Shall I just read through it? Would you like me to read through it? Okay, so for those of you who can read it, essentially what it is a kind of a trail. Now, no map is perfect, right? All of you know that. The first thing you do when you see a map is you ask yourself, what did not make it to the map, right? That should be your, as an entrepreneur, that should be the natural way you think. When someone shows you someone shows you a business model canvas and says, this is our business model canvas and it has all our business model. First question you should ask is, what is in the real world that did not come into the model, right? Okay, so similarly, this map is also like that. It is a caricature, it is a sketch, it is not reality, but I will give you a sense of how it flows. So you start with a raw idea. Some of you may already have a raw idea. For some of you, the idea may have stalled for some reason, or you may have abandoned it. That is 1A and 1B. But we will assume that you have a raw idea. The next step is to work on some very early assumptions. Why you think there is a market? What do you think the product could be? What kind of customers exist for it? Think about our mouse merchant, right? When he saw the mouse, he may have had some early assumptions, but he wasn't sure that he would run into a merchant who would have a cat. It's just that, he may have even picked up the mouse thinking, let me put it on the other side. Very early assumptions. Maybe this is useful, something like that. Next is you evolve a value hypothesis. Now your thinking gets a little more concrete. At this point, you are thinking, okay, where is the value in the market? So how do you move from early assumption to value hypothesis? A lot of times it helps by simply telling your idea. Now, a lot of people tend to think, especially first-time entrepreneurs, that if I put my idea out there, someone is going to steal it. So you will get to, especially people who are, first-time entrepreneurs, you will see this a lot, where they pay too much attention to people stealing their ideas or, protecting their idea. First thing you have to think, no one really gives a shit about an idea. Too many people have ideas. No one really cares about an idea. Even if you go put your business plan, no one will even look at it. That is the reality. So it is counterintuitive. First, you get your idea out there. Tell 20 people, 30 people, what do they think? Are they going to laugh at you? What are they saying? From that, you will get a sense of whether your idea can be grounded. Then you build a value hypothesis. Now, once you've built a value hypothesis, you want to test that hypothesis. You want to see whether, then you make a little bet. That is, make something really small that will prove your hypothesis. And then you take it to the market. You sell it to someone. Try to make some money out of it. Depending on whether it is a success or a failure, you update your assumptions. And you go back to the value hypothesis stage. So there's a little bit of a cycle there. Now let us assume that it was a success. You made a little bet and it worked. You want to sell something. Now you start putting together a group of early adopters. Now, what are early adopters? If you look at people buying your product as a kind of a curve, very early are the innovators, people who have, who know a solution when they see it. Then you have the early adopters who are, a bunch of people who, pick up your product, who want to use your product in the early days. Now, here you have to think about something. Let me use an example of the software market. Okay. How many of you use to-do lists? Right? All of you use some kind of a task manager or a to-do list on your smartphone, right? Now ask the question, how many of you have been using the same to-do list for the past 2 years, let's say, 3 years? In every group, there'll be a bunch of people who are changing their to-do list every 6 months because they're not satisfied with it. Early adopters are kind of like this, they are constantly unsatisfied. They're looking for something new and all that. And when you get your own early adopters, you have to recognize this. They are not your end customers. They are here because they find your product unique. They think it is cool. They want to get the word out. These are also the people who will write blog posts and social media posts about your product because they're so excited. And you use these early adopters to build a very early version of your product, right? And again, there's a little cycle over there. You sort of test it out and you see whether they like it, and you use that to build a bunch of early benefits, feature benefits. Now, when you think that the product, and this is entirely by feel, okay, you get a sense, you get a feel whether the product is stable, whether the people like it, your adopters are using it, and when you get a sense that the product is doing well, when your metrics tell you that there is decent traction, then you approach a beachhead market. Now, what is a beachhead market? It is actually a military term. That is, if you're let's say invading another country, it is very hard to get all your troops and just, plonk them on the country, right? You need to find some small territory you can take over first. Some tiny territory. You take that over, you protect the territory, and then you can bring in supplies and people, and then slowly you can take over the rest of the territory. So it's a military term. So what a beachhead market means is that your early version of a product needs a small part of the market. You don't address the entire market, you address a tiny part of the market, and you make your presence there. And once you have built a beachhead market, the next step is to move into adjacent markets. You build something for a market. Like, for instance, if you are in the field of parenthood, then it makes sense to start with mothers because, and a specific type of a mother, maybe a working mother or something. And then when you get a sense of that, then you can move into fatherhood, you can move into families, you can move into extended relationships. You can keep building the product out to reach a larger set of audience, right? Now, assume that your beachhead market strategy worked off really well. Again, you will do a bunch of little bets in adjacent markets. You have to remember, in adjacent market, you don't generally jump into it because it will drown you. You still have to make little bets, test it out. If it works, then you sort of merge those markets. Essentially, you create another product category, right? Now, Let us assume your adjacent market bets are also doing well. That is around the time you will start seeing growth. That is, your product is slowly, you'll see growth momentum picking up. When this growth momentum, you slowly start seeing this uptick, that is the time to go and build your growth infrastructure. Start building a team. Until then, don't spend on money on people or building a team or any of that. It is, it's very dicey and dangerous. When you start seeing growth, then you put in place, sales and marketing and partnerships, hire people, you set processes, you build the organization out. That is the time you do that to fit your growth needs, right? Now, after this is when you can successfully say that we have achieved market fit. Because you have to remember, market fit is not just product market fit. It is also founder market fit. That is, it's not enough that just your product is ready for the market. You have to be ready for the market as well. You have to remember, making a product from scratch and taking the market is one thing. But building a team, building processes, building out your organization is the bigger thing. And if you don't have it, then no point. The company won't take off. So market fit is not just product market. It is also founder market and a bunch of other fits that are required. Now, after that, your venture is either stable, or it has stalled because of some reason, or you have abandoned it because of some reason, right? Now, go through this, and for those of you who have an idea and who are pursuing it, make a note as to which number is a good number on this chart where you fit. We'll take a minute, just go through it and make a note as to which number best describes where you are currently in your entrepreneurial journey. Yeah, okay, thank you, Urmika. All right, so this presentation is over as well. Let me quickly summarize. Learn by doing things. Make little bets. Don't overextend yourself. Don't lose your money and your family's money and your friends' money and all that. Make little bets. Learn from these little bets, and let these little bets tell you about the market. Right? Be adaptive, especially when things go sour. Remember to make lemonade. Be very adaptive, be flexible, be like that guy who I told you about, whose entire business tanked, and then he goes back and looks at it as a chessboard and decides to just salvage the working parts and completely build a new business out of it. Be adaptive. Finally, remember to collaborate and cooperate. And I don't mean this purely from from a sense of joy and let us collaborate, join hands and all that. Remember that collaboration is nothing but de-risking yourself. If you feel that what you're doing is too risky, you can share the risk by collaborating and cooperating with other people. All right. Okay. So that is in summary. Thank you so much for sitting through this. If you have any questions for me, please go ahead. I'm going to leave the presentation screen sharing still on so that I can reference it if any of the questions ask for it.
Yeah, so we have a lot of questions that the participants have shared with us.
Okay.
First of all, George, really thank you with so many stories that you shared with us. Even we got a lot of clarity while sitting through this guest session, and it was extremely insightful as well.
Thank you.
I will just introduce once the questions that the participants have shared with you.
Sure.
First was, how do you constantly research and integrate the insights into your business?
Right. Okay. That is a very broad question because there are many different types of domains where research is an integral part of the doing itself, right? But what I will do is I'll give you a very generic answer. Don't look at research as a separate thing from the business. That is, if you ever find yourself thinking, okay, I've done all these research, how do I apply it to the business? Then you're doing the wrong kind of research. Ideally, there is no difference. It is like a yin yang, it is like a loop. Business needs more information, which is why you do research. Research gives you insights, which allow you to build your business. So it is a loop. Don't look at it as two separate things. Then you will get into the question of how do I find time for research? How do I get research into business and all that? Don't think of it like that. Think of it as a complete continuous loop. Don't spend time unnecessarily researching things that are not useful for your business, and vice versa.
Okay, that's the so guys, again I have to repeat once. If you have any more questions, just put in the chat box and I'm going to carry on with the questions which were asked previously till then. Okay. So there was another question. Um how do you understand what is the system trying to tell you when you are stuck? And sometimes you have a tendency to misinterpret the insights and the customer feedback. So how do you navigate that part?
Yeah,
That was there.
it is a very good question, and it is a very hard question to answer. Um, think about when a friend of yours was in emotional distress, and you are trying to give them advice, right? You, as a bystander, tend to have very clear, objective views on what is happening. Your friend is going through an emotional trauma, and they find it very difficult to think with clarity, right? It's like being in an ocean on a little boat, and it's a really stormy ocean. You can't control the ocean. You can control but you can do something to control the boat. So what I mean to say is that when you see these, when you make these little bets, when you see these little insights, you may not be in a space to be able to recognize them when you see it, which is why you build a trusted support network around yourself. Now, that is one of the things I'm trying to do with Trellis. That is, in any Trellis network, you have 4 entrepreneurs, and if one of them is going through something very difficult, the other 3 can still give them objective feedback. And you don't have to be in a Trellis network. You can build your own trusted network. Build a network with people you trust and tell them what you see. Tell them that this is what I'm seeing in the market, this is what I'm feeling. What do you think about it? And take objective advice until such a time that you, as an entrepreneur, learn to regulate your own moods and your swings. It takes practice, but eventually you'll be able to look at things with the objective viewpoint, right? And not to sort of get buried in it. Does it answer the question?
Yeah, I think that does actually have covered very important points when you are looking at in it. Then there is something which Isha asked: in which situation is a manager preferred and entrepreneur preferred? And I have to add something to this question as well. This was asked yesterday, and it was: how do you become from a doer to an entrepreneur?
Okay, let me address the first one first, because I don't know what
Yeah,
a doer means literally in this case, but I will take a stab at it.
yeah,
If whoever asked the question, if you're here, you can put it in chat. What does doer mean?
yeah.
Or let Disha know. Okay, so the answer to that is very simple. See, a manager has been trained to manage, and a manager excels in spaces where there is already a stable situation in place, where a hierarchy is already in place, where processes are already set. And managers are very, very important, because if you look at people, if put a group of people in a room, if you do not regulate them, they will be chaos. It becomes jungle raj, right? And managers play a very important role. They've been trained to manage people, to get the best out of people, to sort of inspire people, to get people to work in processes. A manager is needed in stable spaces. An entrepreneur is needed in chaotic spaces. What does an entrepreneur do? He's trying to see the difference between an entrepreneur and a businessman is, and this is my take, okay, on it. A business person is, say, tomorrow you want to sort of do wholesale uh, chaddi banyan business, right? There isn't really much strategy required. You need to find a wholesaler, you need to negotiate a good price, you need a good retail location, and then you will go out and sell your thing. Really, it isn't entrepreneurship. What an entrepreneur does is he or she starts a business in a completely unknown space, an unknown model, which eventually becomes a stable business model that other people can exploit, right? So this is the kind of space an entrepreneur works in: chaos. Manager works in order. Now,
So,
moving from, sorry, go
yeah,
ahead.
just adding on to the same question, is it also meant that we should have a systematic chaos? Like it's
Hmm.
a
See, if you have your notebooks, no, try something. We'll try one very quick exercise, right?
yeah,
Imagine you are walking in your mind, right? Imagine you're walking into a supermarket. to do your grocery shopping, right? Now, write down very quickly, 20 things you would see in a supermarket. Go. 20 things you'll see in a supermarket. Very fast. Don't give your brain time to think. 20 things you see in a supermarket. All of you are doing it, no? Okay. Most of you would have done 5 or 6 by now, no? Now go through your list and see whether you have clustered items together. For instance, have you written bread, butter, jam, for instance, or toothbrush, toothpaste? Can you go through your list? Do you see any clusters? Right? So here's the point. Our brains are meaning-making machines. That is, even if there is chaos, the moment you perceive it, your brain puts it in order. Even when I asked you very quickly to write down 20 things, your brain will try to systematize, it will try to bring order to that random thinking. So what I'm trying to say is that you cannot not be systematic. If you're a human being and you have an idea and you want to go out and work in chaos, you can't help yourself. You will systematize it. In fact, you have to be very careful not to over systematize it, which is called over engineering. So sometimes I see business plans like this, where that person has thought out that business for the next 3 years. If this happens, I will do this. And if this happens, I have a software for this and all of that. The problem with this is you're over engineering. You're thinking beyond yourself. So, to your point, there is some amount of systematic way to approach chaos, but to also recognize that human beings naturally are meaning-making machines. They will naturally systematize it, right? Is that helpful?
George, I have a quick question. So, does this apply for a service-based business as well, or should the entrepreneur be running a product-based?
See, it applies more to products because services in general have very low. You have very low capital needs for a service. A service is also something that is very hard to sort of scale. Very hard to maintain, so some of the mostly it applies to products, and very often people use services as a way to keep the lights burning until they can release a product. Having said that, in today's day and age, products are also services and services are also products. You productize services and products become services.
So additional question is that, so is that the way to grow a service business towards a product?
Not really. So sometimes, you're able to systematize a service to such a degree that it doesn't require, so what is the problem with scaling services? Let us say you're a brilliant business consultant. The problem is scaling your brilliance because there is only one of you. Even if you can go find 10 amazing people like you, it's very hard. Think of a McKinsey and think of that, one 15-day long entry program that they have. The reason is it's very hard to find people like you. So it is harder to scale a service business than it is a product business, in my opinion. You need to commoditize it to such an extent that it becomes easy to serve.
Thanks, George.
That was a very interesting explanation, and that was right. Like, products are now services this time. And we have another question from Prashant. It was based on entrepreneurs commit when they see an opportunity and then work towards figuring it out. What do you think could be the repercussions of it? I mean, planning and data backing with proper analysis, which takes time, has its own positives. So till what extent can we take the risk as an entrepreneur?
See, one is, again, it depends on the kind of, if you are into life care sciences and your product requires 3 crores just to get a prototype up, then obviously, this kind of system I'm talking about won't work. You need a high capital, capital intensive business, and you're going to have to go out and seek capital before you do that. So there are domains where your game plan changes. So having said that, remember that the whole point of these little bets that you do is nothing but a way to de-risk. Planning is important, but remember that you don't want to over plan. You don't want to plan beyond yourself or your situation. plan for the situation. There was some famous general who said, plans are useless, planning is everything. What he means to say is that after you made a plan, throw it away, because the most useful part is done. The most useful part is to engage your mind in the planning process so that you understand the variables you're playing with. But if you stick to a plan just because you have a plan, it is a disaster. So this is a very hard question to answer, but you get a sense, you get a feel from actually being an entrepreneur. What I would advise is, don't overextend yourself. Don't take unnecessary risks. Take very tiny little bets. Take baby steps. Prove out your concept before you move down the line. I hope that is a useful answer.
To add to this question, there was like another question which was asked: how do you keep up the momentum while you're not being able to enter the beachhead market? And how do you decide which are the opportunities to take, which can help you better while entering the beachhead market?
Yeah. See, I will answer the first part of the question because the second part answers itself. As an entrepreneur, if you're able to recognize the opportunity, you know best. It's very hard to tell you at this point how to recognize an opportunity. That is the tacit part. What about seeing a dead mouse in your mind versus my mind? In your mind, a dead mouse may be a huge opportunity. In my mind, it may be a dead animal, right? So I won't answer that part of the question. Sorry, what is the first part of the question? Say it again, please.
Yeah, so first was, how do you keep up with the momentum going where you are not being able to enter the beachhead market?
Yeah.
And how do you take risks,
yeah. See,
which increase your chances?
Yeah. See, the matter of keeping momentum
Yeah.
is simply a matter of finding a fit.
Yeah.
In other words, it is not about momentum. It is that if you haven't found a fit, then you haven't found a fit.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about emotional momentum, then there is no other way around it. You have to find ways to be sane. Find ways to maintain your mental health. There are days where you will be depressed. There are days when you will be very afraid. Days when you feel that you're not worth anything. But you have to remember that it is not you. It is system is telling to tell you something. So essentially, the journey, the momentum that you maintain, I don't know how I can tell you to maintain that momentum. It is each one's personal journey. You find ways to keep going. But what I can tell you is, let the market determine where you stand. Allow yourself, learn from the system. You let the system tell you whether there is a fit, whether you have found a fit or not. You don't get ahead of yourself. Is that useful?
Yeah. Then
sorry, I'm just going to quickly answer one question, the doer question, because I kind of skipped that.
Yeah.
I understand what you are saying. So a doer is someone who's interested to work on an idea to convert to a product instead of building this business point of view. So, don't be an armchair product designer. As in, please be an armchair product designer if it is a hobby, right? I mean, I do that. I have a book where I keep coming up with products that I design, which no one else will ever see except me, and I get some joy out of it. So that is okay. But if you're going to take your product, if you want other people to see it, then you have to think like an entrepreneur. Then you have to network, and don't look at it as a distasteful thing. See, entrepreneurship. Unfortunately, the startup world has seeded this idea in us that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to go big or don't be an entrepreneur at all. That is, either you make billions of dollars or don't even get into it. And I think it's a very toxic mindset. Entrepreneurship is a beautiful human endeavor that is useful for many different things. For some people, it can simply be a lifestyle. You can be an entrepreneur, you can choose to make X amount of money, and that's it. You may choose to work just 3 hours a day and spend the rest of your time writing poetry, and if entrepreneurship works for you, it works for you. So, take that mindset. It doesn't matter if you're a doer, that is good, but get out into the market. Meet some people. Trust some people, build a network, and do it at a small scale. You don't have to drop everything and do it, but take your idea out of the book and into the market. It is a great. You will enjoy it, and do it at your own pace. Let no one rush you. You don't have to be a millionaire overnight. Do it at your own pace.
That's really good. So there's another question that is about One of the participants is asking that a team requires people who can think out of the box, but they cannot find the right set of people in his circle of friends. So, how do you find people with whom the person can collaborate with and go into the business with? How do you build networks who can actually help you collaborate and work with in future and take the risks and understand you?
Okay, this is a very, very wide and very general question. I will try and answer it. First, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to build out your network base. Okay, so for all those who are listening who are not on LinkedIn, please consider getting a LinkedIn account, because it's a very quick way to build your network. And I'll tell you how I do it. I just simply go out into the network and I put my thoughts out, and people connect back. And that is how, in fact, a lot of people who are on this call right now, who I know personally, I have probably met them via LinkedIn, and that's how we became friends. So one is, find ways to improve. See, once you guys get out of college, you will see that it becomes harder and harder to make friends, right? By the time you're 30, 35, the only place you're going to meet new people is at the bar or a pub or some event or something. And you're going to have lesser and lesser chances to network. So it makes sense for you to broaden your network now. In fact, there's one speaker, Abhimanyu Bharadwaj, who spoke earlier. He can give you some. He has put up some videos also, if I'm not mistaken. Some wonderful tips on how you can broaden your network, right? So the larger your network, the better your chances of finding a good partner or a person who resonates with you. Second, don't go, just because you have a business idea, don't go look for a partner. That can be one of the quickest way to kill your company. Partners should evolve organically. You should build partnerships organically. That is, your partner is someone who somehow organically evolved to work with you and your company. I'll tell you why. Because, before you start your partnerships, all your ideas are rosy. You're afraid to take risks. You're thinking, if I have a partner, it'll be nice and all that. Then, once partnerships start, then you are you and that other person is the thing. You're always going to feel, I'm doing so much work. How should it work? And all of those things. You will start arguing, and then you will start thinking of things like, how should the ideal split be? Should it be 70-30, 50-50, and all this nonsense will come. What I would tell an entrepreneur is, don't bring in a partner unless you actually need one. Second, if you decide to bring a partner, then take responsibility for your decision. It is your decision. Third is, discuss the unpleasant and the bitter and the uncomfortable stuff on day one. Discuss I know no one likes to discuss the monies and all of that, but discuss it, please. Discuss right in the beginning, what is the split going to be, how you're going to work together, all of that. Discuss, get all the bad stuff, uncomfortable stuff out of the way on day one. And that will establish a very mature relationship between you. I hope that is a useful answer.
I think that is good stuff. And what we have is the next question, that is like, as an entrepreneur, if you have experienced some failed ventures, how can you make sure that you do not lose your credibility and the trust of the customers?
Okay. This is again a hard question to answer, because it depends on scale of credibility, scale of your goof ups, right? If you've killed a few people because of your product, it is going to be very hard to ever gain credibility again. So, it depends on scale and size and domain you are in and all that. Having said that, we have this, we have, what is the theory of minds? Run a Google search, theory of minds. As human beings, the way we are able to communicate and get along with each other is because I have a theory of mind of how, say, Disha is. I have a sense of what Disha may be thinking. I don't know, but my brain will try and tell me what you are thinking of, what you're feeling, and I will use my imagination of your thinking to come up with how I should talk to you. Does that make sense? So the reason we have evolved like this is because we are social creatures. Human beings, we are social creatures. We need to collaborate and work with each other to make things possible. That is why we have theory of mind. The flip side or the unpleasant side is sometimes the theory of mind makes you feel that you are the center of the universe. You always feel that people are looking, people are watching, what are they going to say and all that, which is complete nonsense. You should just completely ignore it. You tend to overthink whether you have credibility, whether, people will trust you. Don't overthink it. Just do your thing. If you failed, big deal. Everyone fails. In fact, how many people actually succeed? Sorry, what is that?
I think.
Okay, sorry.
That, no, sorry. My brother was talking. Sorry.
Okay, not a problem. So, what I was saying is, let me put it in another way. Okay, let me put it another way. Let us take a distribution of IQ in the general population. So you say, okay, on this side you have a high IQ individuals, this side you have low IQ individuals. This is a gradient, right? Next, you take apply a similar map of entrepreneurial successes, right? This side you have losers, people who have failed in their entrepreneurial ventures, and people who have succeeded wildly. Ideally, if you had to really see a correlation, you will see that, intelligent people, you should also have that many startup successes. No? But that is never the case. Startup successes are a sliver. So it does not mean that intelligent people build. Luck is a huge part of entrepreneurial success. Luck and randomness is a massive part. Otherwise, you will see a similar distribution. You will see successful entrepreneurs and failed entrepreneurs, and you will see a similar distribution. If intelligence and wit and all of those things mattered. But reality is, entrepreneurial success has a lot to do with randomness. What you can do is improve your odds. And how do entrepreneurs improve their odds in the face of randomness? They take many little bets instead of making one massive bet. Right? So don't overthink this thing of, I have failed and I now need credibility. All nonsense. Don't even think about it. You're a very intelligent person, I'm sure. Please go ahead and please keep trying your venture, and don't look at it as failure. Look at it as system feedback. I hope.
I'm glad you have covered the point about intelligence and entrepreneurship, because a lot of students we have got and the participants, they have addressed to us, like, I don't know if I'm good enough to do it.
Yeah. Please don't ever doubt yourself. Please don't ever doubt yourself. So, this, you can, in fact, I'm sure there are some scientific studies about success. Now, ask any successful entrepreneur, and they're going to tell you 100% it is because of something I did. I made the right choices. I made the right moves. No entrepreneur is ever going to tell you it was pure luck. Very rarely do you find entrepreneurs who will admit that I just did hard work, but a lot of it is luck. So, don't ever beat yourself up. Don't ever, overthink whether you're capable or not. Remember this, if you're asking yourself, am I good enough? That itself means you're probably good enough, because someone who's not good enough does not have that introspective ability to ask that question, right? Okay.
The next question we have is, why should we have the concept of doing little and not build huge goals? And why should we focus on learning by doing?
Okay. The first part of the question is, why should we not? So, I'm sure a bunch of you know how to, a lot of you know how to cook. The thing is, I'm sure you know how to cook for maybe 5 or 6 or 10 people. How many of you know how to cook for 200 people? Right? You already, okay, Krishna, maybe. But in general, what I'm trying to say is that your knowledge will find it hard to scale, right? It's the same things, but the moment you have to cook for 200 people, your existing knowledge just falls apart because scales change, right? The reason you take small bets instead of one large thing is to de-risk your goal, because you put in too much effort and you go to the market and it doesn't take off, then you are crushed. But if you put in a tiny bit of effort, you go to the market, you don't really lose much. In fact, you learn, and you're able to, your next bet uses the learning of the first bet, and your 10th bet uses the learning of all 9 previous bets. So essentially, it's kind of exponential learning, right? Second, why learn by doing? I covered this in the talk, but I'm going to say it again. managerial sciences can be learned by theory because they are formulaic. They're sequential. Many of it are processes that you can do in a very linear step-by-step fashion, right? On the other hand, entrepreneur, like let's take the game of cricket, right? Let us say there are two people. There is one person who has been playing cricket from the age of 5. She is uneducated. She hasn't ever been to school or doesn't even know, how to speak, but knows how to play cricket. That is the one thing she knows. She's 25 today and she plays cricket. There is another person who has read everything about cricket. She has watched all the cricket matches. She has read all the cricket guidebooks and knows every little thing about cricket. Now you bring both of them together and you play a game of cricket. Who do you think is going to play better cricket? My point is that there are some things which are very good for theoretical knowledge. There are some things that you can only learn from doing. And entrepreneurship is one of those things that you can actually only learn from doing. It's very hard to learn via theory. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And then the next question we have is a very interesting one. How do you balance between strategy designing and strategy execution so that there is a success that which you can guarantee with a period of time?
So this word strategy is I find it a very interesting term because a lot of people use it. You have strategy for how to build a $1 billion organization. You have strategy for how to make perfect pani puri. So strategy is one of those things that gets mauled. In fact, if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I tried writing an article on strategy. And it had so many assumptions built into it that it became one, Ramayana, and no one is reading that thing now because it's too big. See, this is the problem with strategy. What I would say is, to simplify it, strategic thinking is just a way of looking into the future and working backwards and figuring out what is the optimal path to get there. Not to say that it is the only path, but it is the optimal path given your current situational context and given the resources that you have. What is the optimal path? So essentially, that's what strategy is. So strategy is not something set in stone. It is not to say that you first build your strategy and then you go execute it. You have to get into the mindset that strategy is nothing but a best case scenario that we would like to approach in an optimal manner. Both scenarios and situations change. Therefore, strategies also ought to change, be adaptive, and inform the execution. Does that answer your question? Don't look at it as I will first build a strategy and then I will execute. That is how large companies do it. You know how the problem with large companies, because they have too much mass. When you have like 3,000 people, you have to sort of get them all working on the same strategic thrust. It takes too much time. That is why they do strategy separately and execution separately. But as an entrepreneur, you don't have to think in those terms. Don't use best practices from that. Remember, I was talking about cooking, no? For 10 people versus 300 people. It's not the same thing. So when an organization talks about strategy, it's not the same thing for entrepreneurs. For entrepreneurs, strategy has to be emergent strategy. That is, it should adapt according to your situation, and you should be able to adapt to your execution as well.
The next question that we have is that as a designer or as a user researcher, you identify a problem and you try to solve it. But often what happens is the people only do not realize, or the users do not realize about the problem. So how do you make the users aware of the problem so that you can give them a good solution for it?
See, this is a very good question actually. Users never know. If you show a user a solution, they won't recognize it. You can't go, someone said, no, I think Ford said this, that if I went to a user and asked, what would be an ideal, better carriage, they would have said, just add 2 more horses to it, or, some. So you can't go to a customer and ask them what is a better version, what is a good idea? Is this a good idea? Do you think it is a good idea? Very often they don't know. And if you take customer feedback too early, then you will essentially be ending up creating a product that is already out there in the market, because customers don't know a new idea when they see it. So it is partly gut feel. And this is where I was talking about entrepreneur's personality. So sometimes just an entrepreneur's personality, because you believe that it is a good solution, you have to take it to market and also soften it for reception, so that soften it a bit. You know what, it's called framing. Like if I try to sell you sugar water, cold sugar water as it is, and say, this is water, it's very sweet and I've chilled it, please pay me 15 rupees for it, people will laugh at you. So you create all these ads about friends playing basketball at the beach and opening on Coca-Cola and drinking it. So essentially what you're doing is you're taking the product, which is nothing but cold sugar water, and you're packaging this entire sort of meaning around it, right? And that is how customers find new concepts palatable, right? You don't go and say this is a chocolate bar, you say this is a togetherness bar. So when people start thinking in terms of togetherness bars, that is what branding essentially is. So on one side, no customer is going to tell you when they spot a good idea. That is up to you, right? But remember to package it so that they can, it fits into their life. See, remember, when you open your Microsoft Word, on your system, you still see the metaphor of a A4 sheet. Why the hell? I mean, like, it is a digital space. You don't need a metaphor of an actual paper over there. But the reason it exists is when that crossover was happening, it was meant to make people feel a little comfortable with the old ways of typing on a typewriter with the new digital interface, right? So this is what branding does. That is, when you take your thing out, you help people see a need by segueing it with something that they already do. Does it make sense?
Yeah, it
George,
does.
I have a question in this regard. Hello, can
Yeah.
you hear me?
Yes.
So actually, when talking about a problem, I think especially this comes from a designer perspective, that we talk a lot about customer insights, or getting to know about this idea or something like that. So how do you address that part, considering that you have to build a business or a product around this
Well,
customer insights?
what do you mean by customer insight in this case, Abhishek?
So maybe so for example, if I'm building a medical product, let's say, so customer insights meaning that talking and getting insights from doctors or practitioners are already doing it. So how do we navigate that part basically? Maybe not asking the direct doctor wouldn't make sense per se, but like how do you approach that part then? Getting insights from the users, or that that
See, I
experience.
was okay. Let me give you. I don't know the exact details of the story, but you are from the medical. You guys from the medical field. You can fit in this. So in the early days of GE setting up shop in India, especially for their radiology equipment, I got to see firsthand how the the design team, was building a beachhead market for radiology equipment in India. Especially, they were trying to sell these really expensive scanners, MRI scanners, I think. MRI scanners, I think. And essentially, what I noticed was that the industrial design team, you can't go and ask a doctor for these kind of questions. They wouldn't know what to answer. But they went around the country visiting hospitals, spending half an hour, 1 hour, watching people being diagnosed and x-rayed. And essentially, over a period of time, they built a low cost, I think it was 1/10 the cost of your typical high-end equipment, made for the Indian market. And subsequently, that product was also rolled out to Africa and Latin America. What I'm trying to say is that very often when we say getting customer insight, it does not literally mean asking the customer. Customer feedback is simply a triaging method to triage. That is, one is observational research. That is simply by situating myself in the space, what do I observe, right? So as a designer, observational research is your number one thing. Ethnographic research, you put yourself in that space and you observe and you see what you're able to observe. Second, you get surveys and things like that, interviews and things like that, and you get your second source of information. Your third source of information is secondary research. You do literature reviews, you go look out in the media and you see what is happening, and then you triage between these three and you look for patterns. And these patterns are essentially what you sort of take away from this and apply to your business. So customer insights never, you don't actually ask the customer, take that insight and apply. It never works like that. there is a period of processing these insights through triage, where you look at patterns, and these patterns inform your product development. Is that helpful, Abhishek?
Yes, it is. I have noted down a few quick points, but like an add-on question here. I hope I'm not consuming too much time.
No problem.
So an add-on question being that now you meant said observation research, right? So now in this scenario and in this context of us being in a COVID situation, so if we are looking at ideas and problems right now, right? So how will we? It would be very difficult or challenging,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So how could we enhance?
I'll tell you
or,
how I'm solving it. I'll tell you how I'm solving it, because I run a design firm, and design research is something that we constantly, is a constantly reality in our lives. And the pandemic has screwed things up for everyone. And for instance, this Trellis network, which is the peer support network for entrepreneurs I was talking about, part of it required extensive research. Not so, we looking at entrepreneurship from multiple levels. So entrepreneurship in the SMB space, entrepreneurship in the startup space, entrepreneurship in the informal economy space, entrepreneurship in the artisanal space, where you have these Channapatna toys and the weavers and things like that. So we are essentially trying to look at entrepreneurship in a variety of different spaces so that we can draw first principles from that. Now, I would have ideally liked to go to Channapatna and interview the toy makers and the weavers myself. Now I can't because of the pandemic. So what I've done is, I'm speaking to partners. There was one organization that very kindly said, we are going to be interviewing our people. Would you like to send your questions? They were, really nice. And so I sent them a bunch of questions they can ask their entrepreneurs, and they will, video interview me and send me the interviews. So what I'm saying, Abhishek, is that there are no right answers to your question. You simply have to do what an entrepreneur does. That is, look for an opportunity to get the answers that you need and get it done. So in my case, I've built a network of partners who are able to easily reach their beneficiaries, and I'm able to get my data that way. So, you simply have to find a way to solve this problem. Is that helpful?
Thank you so much, George. Yeah, it does answer that question.
As much as simple saying that, you're put in a swimming pool, like a baby is put in a swimming pool and the baby has to move his hands and legs to float. Otherwise, you're going to drown.
Absolutely. Yeah. As in, what else are you going to do? You have to find ways to make it work. So.
Yeah.
In a continuation with what Abhishek asked, that similar thing happened to my graduation project also. And the issue, there was another layer of issue over this was I was trying to design toys for child therapy, play therapy for relieving of mental stress and mental trauma for the child abuse victims, all forms of child abuse victims. Now the issue was that when since it was COVID, I couldn't go and get on-field research and results, but then I did a lot of literature review and all, and then I talked with the therapists and all. But the issue was they were not understanding my point of view. As a design student, it was really hard for me to explain to them the importance of my idea, and even to go forward and to actually there might have been some situations where they would have helped me, but because they couldn't understand my point of view, they were not ready to actually make me test the products into the play therapy rooms and all. So I was really stuck, and I'm still stuck there. So how to go about that?
Just think the way an entrepreneur thinks, right? The way an entrepreneur looks at the world is that no one owes him anything. No one owes an entrepreneur, him or her, anything. People are motivated to do things. This is not to say that altruism doesn't exist. This is not to say that there aren't kind people. Of course, there are kind people, and you may run into a nice person, who may be willing to do what you need. But by and large, you have to take that no one will do anything for free. No one is going to do something just because you ask or request nicely. You just assume that. So you know what social engineering is. So social engineering actually has a bad negative connotations, because it is used by hackers and freakers to steal your credit card information and all that. But I've been using the term social engineering to mean that you engineer social situations in such a way that people naturally feel motivated to collaborate with you. Essentially, what that means is it is not enough for you to structure your interview about how you want to interact with them. You also have to socially engineer that situation. You have to figure out as part of your plan, why will they want to work with you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like
And that is a hard problem to solve, but you have to get it into the groove that the next time you're going to ask something for someone, ask yourself first, why will they do it? Why will anyone, what is in it for them? In fact, you have to constantly, as an entrepreneur, first question you have to ask is, what is in it for them? And you engineer it into your overall thing, so that when you actually take it out there, it feels like you're doing something for them. And
yeah, like
therefore it opens up.
yeah, I tried. I mean, as you said, like it was a very informal discussion, and then I discussed like how can I collaborate with you, and then if this succeeds, then we can actually design a set of therapy toys. And because there are a lot of loopholes in this whole system of child abuse and how it gets treated, and not just through a product, it can be solved systemically also. So, but still, I mean, because of COVID, they were like already short on staff. And so, I mean, how to go about doing stuff in.
Yeah, let me give you an example.
Yeah.
You know how to use Photoshop and all that? To some level. Yeah, okay. So, let me tell you how an entrepreneur would do it, okay? And I'm just playing with you here. So, just take it with a pinch of salt, right?
Yeah.
So, what I would do is take one of these toys, and if these don't really exist, then do a 3D render or something so it looks super realistic or whatever. And then this organization that you're going to work with, you take their logo and you put it on that 3D model.
Yeah.
And then you just say, hey, I just wanted to share with you very early things. I haven't shown it to anyone, just showing it. What do you think it looks like? Do you think the logo is off?
Yeah.
Or do you think it is in the right place? So essentially, you pose the question like a logo placement question.
Yeah.
But essentially, what you're seeding is, wow, this product with our logo on it looks pretty cool. But she's not talking about that. What is she talking about? Just say no, but essentially I'm rolling out thing, and I would thought of the people in my network who are in this thing, and just for sake of realism, I just put it over there. What does it look like? Do you think it looks cool? Is this a logo? Do you have any other logo? Just keep talking about the logo, right? But what you're essentially doing is social engineering. You're getting them to imagine what the product will look like if it had their brand on it, right? Then you wait for a day or so, and then you put in that question. Hey, you remember the toys I sent you? There are some questions related to that. So essentially, you get your, how your salesman sells you biscuits or whatever when he comes to the door, or an encyclopedia. It is like, no, I'm not asking you to buy, just take a look at it. So essentially, they're all the same. You get your foot in the door, and then you ask the big ask. So constantly do social engineering as an entrepreneur. You always think what is in it for them, and the Photoshop job will take you 15 minutes.
Yeah, like I tried sharing them the renders and everything, but I guess they're so adamant on the fact that since I'm not qualified, like since I'm not a medical professional, like a solution coming from an outsider is not relevant. So I mean, how to?
Yes, and they have a point.
Yeah,
they have a point. So, which is why you don't put yourself, you don't pose yourself as a medical. See, there are some things you don't need to tell them, because this is data that you need.
Yeah,
right? It is completely okay if they look at you as a designer, a toy designer, and essentially what you need from them is their time, and you want them to collaborate with you. You don't need to tell them the whole story, and they don't need to buy in to the story of your life. All they need to see is these toys look great with our logo on it. And then the next step is, if we collaborate with this person, maybe they can make some toys for us. You essentially want to get that kind of a discussion going before you can, put in your other demands. Is that useful?
I mean, that's what but I don't know how to put it directly, but the thing is I am stuck as to how to kind of make them believe this thing.
Yeah.
So
See,
it's
it is hard, see,
yeah,
and you have to find ways to get around the problem. See, in the entrepreneurial space, in the beginning, I had a very hard time, because when you say that you are researching entrepreneurship, you're teaching entrepreneurship, first thing they'll ask you is, "Acha, so you've built $1 million business, is it? Yeah, you're a very successful entrepreneur. You're going to go around teaching people how to be an entrepreneur, is it?" So see, this kind, how do I get around that? No, I haven't built $1 billion business, but I have been studying entrepreneurs for decades. But how do so my job is not to go and tell people,
yeah,
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 what my job is to do social engineering,
yeah,
is to write about entrepreneurship every single day,
ah,
to put out the ideas out there, to put
yeah,
out concepts,
yeah,
and credibility builds by itself.
yeah,
So once people come read enough, and they put two and two together and say, okay, this guy is constantly citing research. It doesn't seem to be someone who's talking in the air. And after a while, someone from M.I.C.E. will invite me to come and talk about entrepreneurship. Right? So right. So that's my point. That is, this is how you build credibility, right?
yeah,
In bits and pieces and bits and pieces. No one's going to buy your entire story.
yeah. That is definitely.
If I came in and said, hey, I'm researching entrepreneurship, I'm writing about entrepreneurship, can I, no one's going to take me seriously. So do it, engineer it.
Yeah. So the next question that we have is, how do you master the market trend challenges? Because people and markets keep on changing.
So
And how do you adapt your plan?
can you say, repeat that question, the first part of the question?
How to master the market trend challenge? Because the people and the markets always keep changing. And how do you come up with a proper plan which can adapt to it?
See, the market, it is the nature of the market to be in constant flow. Market won't wait for you, time won't wait for you, people won't wait for you, nothing waits for you. So this is why you take little bets, right? What we discussed. That is, you don't want to build something that, by the time you take it to the market has moved on. You also don't want to build so little that the market does not have an idea what you're talking about. The whole point of building in small pieces and scaffolding, what is scaffolding, right? Scaffolding as you go, is just so that you can keep with the tempo of the market, right? So if you look at the movement of the market as a kind of an oscillation, you want to match that oscillation. And the one way to match that oscillation is to take many tiny bets, so that you can be in tune with the movement of the market. If you go away from the market too much, see what happens to all the students from business administration over here. How many of your professors actually are practicing in the market, right? If they are teaching you what is happening in the market, yeah, it'll be, I don't think it'll be much. I don't think too many of your professors are actually, practicing in the market today. So a lot of the knowledge you're getting is, out of sync with market movement. So therefore, it will be very high level propositions. So this is a fundamental problem, and it is not just to you. It happens to all entrepreneurs. What you can do is de-risk, right? What you can do is make your entries so small, so tiny, that you're able to match the oscillation. You're able to match the tempo, the rhythm of the market. And that is part of the skill you have to sort of acquire. I hope that is I know it is a very abstract answer, but I hope it is useful.
Yeah, I think this is actually related to another question someone asked. How do you resolve the contradiction between jumping to an opportunity versus playing safe game? While one is in risk, but has great chances of success, and another is having low risk but considerable chances of having failure as well. So it's basically you have high chances of risk but of high chances of winning, and the other is low chances of risk and high chances of failure. So how do you choose what is better?
Yeah, if such choices made themselves available to you, then it is very easy to choose, right? I'm saying that if you ever in a situation where such choices were made very apparent to you, then it is very simple to make the right choice. You would simply go after high risk, high payoff, right? Because the opportunity was just sort of put in front of you like that, versus a low risk and low payoff. But life is too complex for that. When opportunities come in front of you, they are never qualified like this. When you look at an opportunity, you cannot make out at first glance whether it is high risk, whether it is low risk. You simply can't make out. What you can do is to actually do it. Take on that opportunity and play it out with a tiny bet. That will let you know how much risk there is and how much of a payoff there is. So remember, as an entrepreneur, you never extend yourself too much. You never put all your money at risk. You know that you're in this for the long game. You don't put your life savings into building an entire enterprise software and take it to the market. That is just ridiculous. What you do is you take many small bets and allow that bet to teach you about the inherent risks and the inherent payoffs in the market, and you approach it from that direction. So just to summarize, in reality, such contradictory options never show themselves in front of you. You don't actually see them so clearly. When an opportunity comes to you, you can't even make out. So most people cannot even recognize that it is an opportunity. They will just let it pass. If you can even recognize an opportunity, then you do one small bet. That bet will let you know how much of a risk there is. Then you can take those risks if you choose to.
Yeah. Then the next question that is, how do you control your emotions while hustling over a product or an idea? And
Yeah, see, this is a very important question. It is, I believe, a question that not enough people ask or not enough people write about. See, maintaining your mental health is very important as an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is one of the things that can lead to deep depression if you're not careful. It can also lead to unmitigated joy, and you'll end up making stupid mistakes because you think you're a winner and all that. So it has both extremes. It can make you extremely stupid and you overextend yourself, like one entrepreneur in the startup space who was in housing.com or something, I don't remember, who was so confident he's doing so well that he made a lot of stupid mistakes. And then you have the other side of things, right, where people who are so depressed about their thing also end up. So this is a very important question, and you have to remember, one, don't take it personally. When failures happen, when setbacks happen, recognize that you have gotten into entrepreneurship, which is one of the oldest known endeavors in mankind. It is one of the most courageous things that anyone can do. See, the easier thing to do is go get a job. I'm not saying anything bad about people who are employed. The nation runs because of you guys. But entrepreneurship it requires a lot of courage. It requires a tremendous amount of self-confidence. Therefore, when things go bad, remember why you started it. Remember what is the whole point. Remember you're a courageous person. And remember most of all that it has huge amounts of randomness and luck. If you fail, it is not because of you. It is because the universe is stacked against you. This is how reality is. You find ways, you meditate, you write, you stay in touch with your family, you talk to some friends, you make sure that there are people with whom you can discuss these things. Don't bottle it up inside you. It is a very important question. You have to learn to regulate your emotions. Most importantly, don't take it personally. It is nothing but system feedback. I hope that is useful.
Yeah, thank you for answering the question, because at least 3 people asked something similar to that by the end of the conversation.
Okay.
And the last question that we have is, I have a failed venture, but if I go through the reflections, I have multiple areas where I fail in. But I don't know the right way to reflect back upon that, to decide if I can use some learnings of the previous venture and can I transfer it into my new venture or not.
See, it is a very good question. See, you remember that story I spoke about, that CRM company that was building their own CRM, and 3 years later they were still building that CRM. There is an interesting thing about how that company started. That company was started by one guy who went abroad and studied at some major institution, actually. One of these big institutes, in the US. And he's a graduate. He finished that, came back to India, and didn't want to join a job, and he wanted to start something on his own. Right? Ideally, he would have liked to start a business that had to do with what he studied, but that didn't happen, and he started a data entry business. He got one small house on rent, got 5 or 6 people to do data entry, and started getting data entry projects, and that was the only thing he had. Doing data entry, this guy built, when I met him, he was running a firm with 500 people in it. And they were also producing software, they were doing IT integrations, they were doing a lot of things. And this guy is the same guy who's building that CRM, which 3 years later. So here's the thing. He forgot what worked for him in the first place. He forgot how he built that business. He built that business by taking on data entry jobs, which everyone else said no to. And because he was so highly educated, he took on so many data entry jobs that he was able to see patterns. He took those patterns, he built a back office business for large corporates in the US. And with that, he built a fortune. And then he decided to take the fortune and build a CRM. But he forgot the very lessons that helped him to start that company in the first place, taking little bets. So it is not just how do you learn from your failures. People forget to learn from their successes as well. You know, if he had remembered how he built his first business, he would have built that CRM also properly. Right? So don't be too hung up about that. Put your failures down. Try and have it do it in a systematic way. To whatever level possible. Identify the processes that worked. More importantly, identify what did not work. Have it in a systematic place. Put it in one place, and then you start your new venture again, right? Because the only way you can learn is by doing, right? There is only so much post-mortem you can do for your old one, and start your new business. But remember to keep your book updated. Remember to keep going back to your old failures. Once in a while, open that book, read through it, add to it, make new entries. That is the way you will ensure that you don't commit the same mistakes again. Not by constantly writing it down, but by doing something new. I hope that is useful.
Yeah, I think that's it so
That's
far,
it?
the questions.
Okay, great.
But I'm pretty sure that during the question answer session particularly, we have got a lot of clarity about
That's
how
great.
to approach entrepreneurship. Like I personally got it. Like there were many areas even I was getting stuck at. I'm pretty sure others would have also. We have so many similar questions. So it was interesting as well. Thank you so much, George. And it was really very insightful. And yeah.
Sorry, yeah. Is that yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me, and I hope this was useful.
Yeah.
I will send my presentation over to Disha, and so they can make it available for whoever needs to download it. Thanks everyone, and thanks for joining. And I think we took quite a bit of time. No? Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Actually, very well articulated stories with lot of amazing insights from lessons. So actually, what happens is we as human beings are programmed to learn from somebody's mistakes. So I think you brought out that stories very well. So somebody's mistakes and somebody's success. You taught both the lessons, and I think that's really amazing. Thank you so much on behalf of M.I.C.E Labs, and I have my colleague Priya also as well. From Think Young. So we both of you thank all of us together, George, for coming in this session and sharing his amazing insights. Thank you so much, George.
Thank you so much for having
So
me.
do you have any last thoughts or something that you'd like to share with us?
Well, since you're all students, one, get very comfortable talking about your idea. In fact, try an exercise. Go to LinkedIn today. Whatever idea that you're working on, articulate it. Tag M.I.C.E Labs in it if you want to. But articulate your idea and put it out there and see how people respond. So one, get comfortable getting your idea out in front of other people. Stop thinking that it is something unique and precious and people will steal it and I keep it in my mind and all that. Get your ideas out in front of people, right? One thing. Second, get used to making little bets. I don't mean like a gambler. I mean like someone who's going to de-risk. So if you have a big problem, don't try to put all your money and effort into solving that one big problem. Take a tiny bet and solve one small piece of that problem, right? Third is that last question we answered, don't beat yourself up. Don't punish yourself. Don't beat yourself. You're not a loser. You're none of those things. You're a very intelligent, courageous person. We need more entrepreneurs in this country. I'm very glad that all of you are so interested in entrepreneurship. Please go out and experiment and build. Don't let your setbacks and failures hold you back. You are an amazing person. Please do it.